Hey, sixth graders, Mr. Ronan here. Just wanted to give you guys a quick review over the digestive system. We'll be going over the 7 stages of digestion, and I'll also be briefly describing each stage as well, kind of what goes on at each place. So, what is the digestive system, Mr. Ronan? Well, simply put, the digestive system is our way, or our body's way rather, of turning food into energy. Our body absorbs different nutrients, absorbs water throughout this system, and it's one of the huge ways our body stays alive, which is important. I think we all want to stay alive. So without the digestive system, we're in trouble. Very important. So we'll start right off with stage one, which is the mouth. Digestion begins in the mouth. It does not begin when food is on a plate. It doesn't begin when food is in our hand. It begins once food is in our mouth. This is because two different types of digestion occur: chemical digestion, mechanical digestion. We'll start, I know I have chemical listed first. We're going to go ahead and start with mechanical because that's kind of instinctual for us. It's what we do naturally when food is entering into our mouth. Once we put food in our mouth, we start chewing. That is called mechanical digestion because there's movement involved. I want you to look at this. Mechanical, moving, both start with M. That's one way we can remember it. And mechanical digestion occurs in our stomach as well, and we'll get to that once we get to stage 3. But for now, once we're in our mouth, the mechanical digestion that occurs is when our teeth break the food apart and chew it apart. The chemical digestion, however, is when the enzymes in our saliva chemically break down food. So if you remember in class when I had you guys eat goldfish, I just had you let the goldfish sit in your mouth. I didn't let you chew it. I didn't let you swallow your saliva. I had the goldfish just hang out in that pool of saliva that was building up in your mouth. And what you noticed was the goldfish started to get very soggy, started to fall apart, even though you weren't chewing. You were not chewing, and the goldfish still broke apart. That's called chemical digestion. Chemical digestion involves no movement whatsoever. Our teeth aren't grinding, our stomach isn't grinding. It's when enzymes in our saliva break the food apart. And let's also remember that saliva comes from salivary glands. I didn't write this down in this PowerPoint. Forgive me for that. But saliva chemically breaks down our food because of the enzymes, and that comes from salivary glands. Stage 2, once the food leaves our mouth, we swallow, it goes down into our esophagus. One thing we talked about in class was, why doesn't food go into our lungs? It almost has the same pipe. How come food doesn't go into our lungs, but rather goes into our stomach? That's because there's this thing called the epiglottis. In class, a lot of you guys called it the flappy thingy. Let's keep it scientific. We're going to try and remember to call it the epiglottis. This is a flap past our throat that shuts and covers our air pipes when we swallow food, which makes it impossible for us to breathe and swallow. So you can try this. We tried this in class. Try and breathe air when you're swallowing water. Try and breathe air when you're eating food. You can't do it. That's because the epiglottis shuts, closing our windpipe. So this makes it impossible for food to enter our lungs, but it also makes it impossible for us to breathe at the same time. Sometimes when people start choking, that's because their epiglottis didn't shut and food is entering into their windpipe or their air pipe. And then that's their body trying to get rid of that food, trying to push that food out of their windpipe. So the epiglottis is essential in keeping us from choking and from food entering our lungs. And we talked about this in class as well. This big word right here, peristalsis. Peristalsis. This word is super important because we can eat upside down because of this word. We can eat laying down because of this word. We can eat sideways because of this word. Peristalsis is the process by which muscles push food throughout our body. It's a natural idea for us to think that because of gravity, food just falls straight into our stomach. That's not the case at all. The reason food moves down into our stomach is because of peristalsis. Muscles in our esophagus are pushing food down our esophagus into our stomach. This occurs also in the small intestine. If you remember our small intestine, if you follow my mouse, it's all like windy, goes up and down and left and right and sideways and frontwards and backwards. Can't blame gravity for that. The reason food can move through our small intestine is because of peristalsis. It's also important to remember that we have mucus inside our esophagus. This will help food slide down our throat, and it'll help peristalsis move more efficiently. And let's also remember that when we swallow food, once food is in our mouth, it's basically clobbered with saliva, and that'll help food slide down our esophagus as well. Stage 3, once food leaves our esophagus, it enters into the stomach. And if you remember in the mouth, we talked about the different kinds of digestion. We have chemical digestion and mechanical digestion. Inside our stomach, there's this pool of acid called gastric acid or stomach acid. Within gastric acid and stomach acid, there's this specific acid we talked a lot about in class called hydrochloric acid. This acid is so powerful it can burn through metal. So my question is, if this acid can burn through metal, why doesn't it burn through our stomach? Why is that possible? It makes no sense, right? Well, you have to remember our stomach is protected by mucus on the inside of our stomach walls. And the hydrochloric acid can't penetrate through this mucus. So the mucus acts as protection. And this is why hydrochloric acid doesn't harm our stomach. And let's also go back here. The hydrochloric acid will chemically digest food, kind of how the saliva in our mouth broke down food. Same thing goes on in the stomach. Hydrochloric acid will break food apart as well. A lot of us don't recognize this, but there's actually mechanical digestion that goes in our stomach. You might say, oh, it's because I can feel it when I'm hungry and my stomach is growling or maybe vibrating. That's not mechanical digestion. That's our stomach telling us it needs more food. The mechanical digestion that goes on is when our stomach actually kind of grinds food together. We can't feel that as it's happening, but our stomach is actually pressing food, trying to break it apart mechanically. And remember, mechanical movement. Our stomach is moving to mechanically digest food. Whereas with the hydrochloric acid, there's no movement involved. Food is just hanging out in the pool of acid. There's no movement going on there. So our food mechanically, or rather our stomach chemically and mechanically digests food. And this forms a substance, like a liquid substance called chyme. Not chyme, but chyme. And this is what's going to move throughout our digestive system from here on out. Stage 4, we have the small intestine. So once food, or rather chyme now, leaves our stomach, it's going to move into the small intestine. And our small intestine is about 20 feet long. So some of us get confused. Why is it called the small intestine if it's 20 feet long? That's pretty big. We have to remember the small intestine and the large intestine are given their names small and large because of the width of them. The small intestine is pretty skinny, but it's very long. The large intestine is only 4 or 5 feet long, but it's very thick. That's why it's called large. So our small intestine is a 20-foot long coiled tube. So it's windy, goes up and down, sideways, left, right. It's a coiled tube where 90% of the nutrients from chyme get absorbed into our bloodstream. So this is where most digestion occurs. This is where most of our nutrients get absorbed into our blood flow. Villi are tiny finger-like structures inside the small intestine that absorb the nutrients from the chyme. So they kind of, if we zoom in a little bit, I don't have a picture up here. That's my regret. I wish I did post a picture here for you guys. But inside our small intestine are thousands, maybe millions of little things that look like hairs. They look like hairs. And those are responsible for absorbing the nutrients out of the chyme that's moving through our small intestine. Oh, and real quick before I forget, we talked about this. The small intestine is a coiled tube, meaning it's very windy and up and down. The reason chyme can travel through the small intestine is because of peristalsis. Okay, because the muscles in our small intestine are pushing chyme throughout the small intestine. Once chyme, whatever is remaining from the chyme, rather from the small intestine, that'll move into the large intestine, which remember, it isn't longer than the small intestine, it's just thicker, it has a greater width. This is where water gets absorbed from the chyme. And then eventually the chyme, whatever is not absorbed in the large intestine, will become waste or feces or more commonly poop. Okay, and a lot of things can go wrong in the large intestine. For example, If too much water gets absorbed in the large intestine, that's when our waste starts to get more solid, and then that ends up resulting in constipation. Sometimes not enough water is absorbed in our large intestine, and that'll result in diarrhea. And again, it's important to remember that the large intestine, this is where waste is produced. We're going to be scientific here. We'll call it waste. We'll call it feces. Let's stay away from the word poop. All right? I know we love to say it, but let's try to stay scientific. Since it's a science class, we'll use scientific words here. Stage 6, we're going to keep this brief. Once whatever is left from the large intestine, whatever doesn't get absorbed, this is now waste. This is where waste will travel before it makes its exit. And then this is the last stage of digestion, the anus. This is where waste will exit our system. Remember, our system is our body. So waste exits out of the anus, and then that'll be the end of our digestive system. And this is going on our entire lives. This is constantly going on, and it's very important that we recognize that this is going on every day, every minute. We don't even realize it, but our body is constantly working, whether we realize it or not, to keep us alive. I hope this was helpful. If you have any questions, let me know in class. Thank you guys for watching this.